going to get started. Like I said, we are Career Scoops. We are an educational technology company that helps young adults discover their dream careers. We use AI. We have an AI career assessment and micro mentorships to help young adults explore different career paths and see really what you want to pursue after you graduate high school. We work with young adults aged 14 to 24 and put on various different programs like this webinar. If you have any questions for us or want to contact us directly, our email address is info@career-scoops.com. And you can also contact us online. We're on Instagram, TikTok, and Facebook. But we're happy to have you here and hope that you find this information valuable. In today's webinar, we will be reviewing how financial literacy impacts your future, right? So the financial decisions that you make now can have a lasting impact on your life and your career, not just the job that you choose, but also the money you're able to make and how satisfied you are with those decisions. So we're going to be reviewing just how that's important and then letting Elliott share some more about how you can better understand your finances as a teenager. So let's talk about the relationship between your career choice and your income. So, as you may know, different career paths offer different levels of earning potential, right? So you can expect to make different amounts of money depending on what you do professionally. And no matter what you do, it's important to understand your finances so you can make the most of the money that you do earn. So, for example, we have a couple of different salary differences over on the right. Like an elementary school teacher can expect to make somewhere between $52,000 and $77,000, depending on the state and whether they work for a public or a private school, and a bunch of other factors, how far they are in their career. As alternatively, someone in more of like a creative career, such as a cosmetologist, the median income for them is somewhere between 24,000 and 35,000. And we have an example of like legal counsel. So that could be like a lawyer or even a legal administrative assistant. They can expect to make somewhere between 77 and over six figures in their career. And this is important because the amount of money you're able to bring home and how you manage that money, like whether you invest it or if you save all of it, or if you don't save any of it at all, that's going to impact how it is, what you can accomplish in your life. And so there is a direct relationship between career choice and income. And that's why this Career Scoops, are putting on this webinar to kind of shed some light on some of the other things that affect your life after high school, right? Not just your career choice, but also what you do with the money that you earn. So one of the benefits of financial literacy is that you will be free to chase your dreams, right? So when you manage the money that you earn wisely, you'll be able to basically do whatever it is that you want with it, right? Take advantage of dream opportunities when they come. It's amazing to be able to have the financial resources you need when you need them, especially if it's like an unexpected opportunity or something that it is that you're planning. For example, we have traveling with friends, right? Traveling and taking planes, taking trips on planes or road trips or going to concerts, things you might want to do with your friends. All that takes money. And it's important to, for example, have the money, say if you have a savings account just for fun, or a savings account just for things that travel expenses, that would make you more prepared to be able to take advantage of those opportunities versus if you didn't. Going to college, of course, tuition is something that costs money, so financial literacy is very relevant there. And finding your first home, whether that's like an apartment or a home, however you choose to go about that. Managing money is going to become increasingly important for you as you get older. Okay, another big benefit of financial literacy is that it can relieve stress, right? When you have your finances managed well, you likely won't be feeling overwhelmed or overly stressed in, predictable financial situations. So, practicing wise financial habits, such as spending less than you earn or having an emergency fund, can ease stress and make unexpected situations more manageable. For example, unexpected car repairs or medical events or even last minute concert tickets, something that wasn't planned. When you are financially literate, you are prepared for these situations even before they happen. And that can make life a lot easier to live. Okay, and then our final benefit of financial literacy, at least as far as it is relevant to you at this age, is that you will understand debt and you'll be able to benefit from debt. So I know this is something that Elliot is going to talk about in depth, but understanding debt can help you invest in your future, achieve your goals, and build a strong financial future. Debt can be your friend. There are lots of different ideas about debt that you'll start to encounter, but some of the benefits of being familiar with how it works and how it impacts your life is being able to avoid interest charges on, say, like your student loans if you end up taking those out, or getting a mortgage, getting your first home, or starting a business. Um, as Elliot will explain, debt has a lot of positive that can be a tool that you can use positively in your life if you understand it well. And that's a part of financial literacy, as opposed to not really understanding it well and using it anyway, and maybe finding yourself in a situation you didn't want to be in financially. So we're going to transition into the speaker part of this webinar with our guest speaker, Elliott Meena. He is an investment banker and the VP of Ansley Capital Group. He'll share a little bit more about himself and his background, how he got started. But he's here to elaborate on some of these financial concepts and share some insights that you can use to create the future that you want for yourself. We're going to transition to his presentation. We encourage you to take notes and prepare some questions. At the end, we will have 15 minutes for 15 minutes or longer for a Q&A with Elliot, where you can ask him anything about finances, anything that he presented in his presentation that maybe you want a little bit more information about. This is really just a great opportunity for you to arm yourself with the knowledge that you need to have a strong financial future. But if that is all and we don't have any questions, then I'd like to welcome Elliot up to introduce himself.
Thank you, Deja. I hope everybody can hear me. And nice to meet you all. I'm going to share my screen and, oh, I can't share it actually right now. There we go. Now I'm going to share my screen and show you some slides I've put together. And I know we're going to have a Q&A at the end, so I'll try to keep this. Oh, I just shared my whole screen, didn't I? 1 second. How do I share just the window? There it is. Okay. Well, first of all, as Deja mentioned, my name is Elliott Meena. I work with Ansley Capital Group, and I put my email address here in case anybody has any questions after the fact and wants to come back and have a conversation. I'm always open to answer any questions, hopping on a phone call. I think this will be recorded, so if you don't write this down, you can find my email later. But pretty simple, first and last name, and then our website is ansleycapital.com. And then a little bit about me. Since this is sort of a financial literacy tied into a maybe student career planning session, I'll give a little bit of a background because I think it is important to understand that I did get my master's and my bachelor's degree in finance or in a business degree from the University of Florida. But actually before that, I wanted to be a doctor, and I spent 4 years studying medical and science and chemistries. And then it wasn't until my senior year or my 4th year that I realized my aspirations had changed and the world was a different world than it was when I entered college. And I shifted my career from a science degree to a business degree. And I didn't go to grad school right away. I moved to New York City and got a job on Wall Street right away. So for anybody thinking that you've already got your roadmap set and you're not going to deter and you're never going to change and you're going to do the career that you've always thought you're going to do, That might not be the case, and it's not the end of the world. You're allowed to change your mind. That's what I did. That's what plenty of people do. You don't have to study something in college that is going to be your job. You could study something that you think is interesting and then get another job. So it doesn't necessarily need to be pick your life day one of the college that you go to. It's go to college, find out what you like, find out what you're good at. I think if there's one thing that I could tell you, there's probably a job for anything out there. 20, 30 years ago, there weren't that many careers available that kind of deviated from the norm, so to speak, but now there are. So if there's something very niche or very peculiar that you're interested in, don't be afraid because there's probably a career for you. And the more specialized, the more successful you could theoretically be within your field. I don't want to say that that's going to generate income, but it can generate self-purpose, it can generate self-worth, happiness. And as you think about a career, those things are as important as a salary, in my opinion. So after I graduated from Florida, like I said, I moved to New York City. I got a job on Wall Street. And for the last 15, almost 20 years now, I've been in a variety of roles in the finance umbrella. I started and I'm currently an investment banker, which basically means that I help other companies with their finances, but I've also worked on the corporate finance side, or maybe you could hear that as the buy side, which is where I've helped my own company, the company that I work for. I'm actually making investments and acquisitions on behalf of that company. Whereas in an investment banking role, you're more of an advisor, you're more of a broker, kind of like a real estate agent. You're not selling your own house, you're helping somebody else sell their house. So you work in between of a buyer and a seller, and you take a commission off of the transaction. That's where my role is currently. It's where I've been for about the last 8 years or so with Ansley Capital Group. And it's exciting. I will be honest, but it's also stressful because you've got to find a lot of clients to work with. Because once you're done with a project, you have to move on to the next one. Whereas if you're with a company, you kind of have your roles outlined and your day-to-day responsibilities are already somewhat set in stone. With the advisory on the sell side and investment banking, like I said, you have a project or a deal or a transaction, and once that closes, you're on to the next one. And you got to go back out to conferences and networking and socialize to meet somebody out there who's willing to hire you for the next transaction. But today's about financial literacy. And I got to be honest, financial literacy is a phrase that I probably take for granted. I feel as if I do know what the financial markets entail, and I know what I need to keep I need to be aware of to keep my stress levels low. But I've never really called it financial literacy until Career Scoops called and said, hey, let's put some slides together. And it really made me do some self-searching of what I would define as self-literacy. But before we go to my definition, I'll introduce you to a website. If you haven't heard of Investopedia, it's a fantastic website. I check it weekly because you never know everything about finance, and it's a good source to read a description, look at examples, and maybe even be linked to other websites that actually have a product or something in use that could give you a real life example. But Investopedia defines financial literacy as an in general premise the ability to understand and make use of a variety of financial skills, including your personal financial management, budgeting, and investing. That's a quote from the website, and I think it works, but I didn't want to deviate it. So instead, what I did was I bolded understand and make use because my definition is a little different. For me, and I'm looking at this from an individual perspective. So my definition of financial literacy might not be the same of everybody else's, but it's what I need to keep my stress levels low and to keep my financial portfolio in check. And I say financial literacy is the awareness of how your different assets, which are sources of income, such as a job that pays you money, and your different liabilities, which are your uses of income, or sorry, uses of money, which are your expenses, reoccurring or one time, how those different sources and uses impact your life. So it's not really understanding everything, it's being aware of all the money coming in and all the money you're going out, and just having a grip of where those sources and uses are going and can you manage them on a basic level. This is before you get into any sort of financial resource tools. This is before you talk to anybody like a financial planner or you put anything into Excel. It's just a basic awareness in your own head. Do I know what's coming in the door, and do I know what's going out the door? And if what's going out the door is greater than what's coming in the door, then there's no chance for savings. But if you can bring in more than you spend, that's when the savings I guess, idea comes up and what can you do with that savings? Maybe you invest it, maybe you put it away for a rainy day. Maybe things like Deja alluded to, you might have an emergency fund for a car accident or a travel or school, whatever you want to do, but you can't do anything with it if you spend more than you make. And so I would say at the end of this, a strong financial literacy is when one feels that they are living their life within their means with as little stress as possible. And so I finished with that because I started with it. For me, financial literacy is living in a world that you're not very stressed out in, because money can be stressful. I don't think anybody has gone a day where they or gone their entire life where they haven't at one point been somewhat stressed about a financial decision. And some people go every day. And if you're in debt with maybe a hefty student loan or a house mortgage, that stress can really dip into your bank account, but also into your health. And you can really start to see personal impacts, not just bank account impacts from what you've made on your financial choices. So financial literacy for me is the awareness, but a strong financial literacy is the awareness to keep everything in check so that your stress is minimalized. And I hope that's a pretty easy differentiation. You can't get to a strong financial literacy if you don't have just a basic understanding to begin with and a basic awareness. But just a basic awareness isn't enough to say, okay, now I can do whatever I want with my money. You need to be able to say, I can keep my life living within my own means, and thinking to future, I can even put away a little bit of money to save. So here are some basic financial concepts. There's kind of two graphs here, or two visuals. The top is moving from a left to right, and then the bottom goes back to what I alluded on the previous page. I've bolded on every single page the phrases sources and uses, because if there's two things that you need to bring out of this entire conversation, it would be, what are my sources, i.e., what are my income, what are my areas of cash that are actually bringing into my bank account? Do I have a job? Am I an Uber driver? Do I sell a service online? Anything that kind of gets me money in the door. And then what are my uses? What am I spending money on? Is it gasoline? Is it groceries? Kind of one time, or sorry, single day, I would call small-ish expenses, or are they bigger? Is it a monthly rent? Is it a monthly tuition check? Is it a monthly mortgage? Those are the bigger uses that you really do need to wrap your head around. But the sources and uses concept, it's true, I think, in all forms of finance, personal finance, corporate finance, investment banking. People want to say, hey, if you're asking for money, what are you going to use that money for? That's from an investment perspective. Or if you're borrowing money, the person loaning you that money says, well, what are you going to use this money for? If you say you're going to get a car loan, but then you end up buying plane tickets, that's not going to impact your credit very well. And we'll get to that later. So the first thing that you need to have from a financial literacy basic concept is, what's a budget or what's a forecast? And you can't do that if you don't know what you're bringing in and what you're putting out. So that's why the first step is just to identify. You don't need to put anything next to it. Don't even really need to put dollars down. The first step is to write the list of all the sources of income and all the uses of cash. The second step would be to put approximate dollars next to it. I forecast on a monthly basis, and then you multiply that by 12 and you get your annual. I think that's the safest way to do it. I don't think you need to forecast on a daily or even a weekly basis, but you can. I think a monthly basis is a safe starting off point. And even from a professionalized perspective, in my job, all the models that I build and all the forecasting I do is on a monthly. Very rarely have I ever broken that down into a weekly forecast or a daily. I think people understand that things move throughout the week and throughout the month, but at the end of the month, it's a nice snapshot in time to really say, how did we perform? And it kind of aligns a lot with how people get paid, either once a month or twice a month. So to put a forecast together that doesn't necessarily align with when the money's coming in could be a little misaligned, I guess. Yeah, that's the right way of saying it, probably misaligned. So you really do want to have a monthly forecast at the very least. And then if you can, once you have the amount next to it of an actual spend, put another column next to it or another number that says, well, what should I try to spend every month? If I spent $50 last month on gas, but I know I took a couple extra trips that I shouldn't have, maybe I could get this month down to $40. 40 times 12, $480 a year. So then roughly you round up, you spend $500 a year on gasoline. That would be kind of a rough forecast of what I would say based on an actual expense. I spent $50 last month. I don't think I'll spend 50 every month, so I won't spend $600. But if I can cut back $10 a month, that'll save me 120 at the end of the year. So then I go from 600 down to 480. Maybe you have a little bit of a buffer in there and you round up to 500. That's an example of how you would forecast for gas. Now, say you did actually say, I'm going to budget $600 for gasoline and you only spend 500. Well, then in the middle column here, that means you saved $100. And that $100 could go towards whatever you wanted to go towards. You could put it in a bank account that earns interest, or you could, which is I call passive. You don't touch it. It just kind of grows and accumulates over time with the interest that's paid. Or you can be a little bit more active and you could invest that money. And there's a lot of ways to invest. You could still invest passively, where you put it in maybe a fixed income, like a certificate of deposit, or even buy a bond if you have a Fidelity or a Schwab account. Or you could be more active, which is stock picking. That's not necessarily a day-to-day thing. You can pick exchange traded funds or mutual funds that follow an index, and you don't have to check it every day. You could check it every week or again every month. That's how I do my portfolio picking. I'm not a day trader, but I do have a portfolio that I need to be aware of. So I look at it maybe 2 or 3 times a month seriously, but then I update it once a month. I have a spreadsheet offline that I go and I track all my investing and all my expenses. Well, all my sources and uses are in my own spreadsheet. So you can't get to investing if you don't have money to save, and you don't really have money to save if you didn't start off with a budgeting and with a forecasting effort. That's the suggested approach, and that's my line here. But there are people out there, and I'll call them bold people, who go straight to the investing. They've got money. They don't care how much they spend. They want to go straight to the investing because they think that that's the way that they can really grow their nest egg. And they're not wrong, but I would say that's not the safest approach. The safest approach is to start off identifying all of your sources and uses, being financially aware of what is coming in the door and what is going out the door so that you're not overspending on things like gasoline, so that you can keep yourself within your own budget, within your own forecast. And if you come in what's called under budget and you have money left over, that's when you can take your savings and that's when you can move it into investing. And the more you save and the bigger it grows, you can pick some bigger items. Right now, if you're a student, I'm not going to expect that you can put away money for a down payment on a house. But maybe after 6 to 12 months, you might have enough money for a down payment on a car. So I would say be realistic and maybe even have a goal of what you're trying to buy, but don't shoot for the moon and say that you're going to be actively managing a portfolio of a couple $100,000 in 6 months, or you're going to be able to buy a down payment or buy a house with a down payment in 6 months. I'd say start small, maybe with a budget for a trip or even a car, and try to get to that number, something over 10,000, but not over 20,000, not over 50,000. I think that's a pretty good goal just to try to wrap your head around and achieve. If you can budget, save, and even invest and grow up to a threshold of five digits, not 6 digits, that would be a pretty good starting off goal. At the bottom of this, you may have heard of something called a balance sheet. A balance sheet is for a corporation to state all of the assets and all the liabilities that they have at a particular point in time. And it can also apply to an individual or a human or a family. Everyone has assets, and for the most part, on an individual basis, that's pretty much your cash. What do you have in your bank account? But you could also use jewelry, collectibles such as baseball cards. Those could be converted into cash if you wanted to. I'm not saying you should right now, but if you didn't want to spend some cash and someone was going to offer you a nice piece of cash for maybe a Michael Jordan basketball rookie card that you have, and you're not a Bulls fan and you don't mind getting rid of a Michael Jordan rookie card, well, then you can convert that into cash. So that's still an asset to you, the price of which might be not necessarily as easy to discern as a box of cereal or a gallon of milk, but it still has value. On the other side of the balance sheet are your liabilities. What do you owe? And the big items are usually a home mortgage and even a car payment. But it can go down to things like student loans, credit card debts, and even just kind of small reoccurring expenses that you have on subscription that you can't cancel for a year, maybe a Spotify subscription or something like that. That's $10 a month that you have to spend. And you know that that's a use of cash going out the door. So assets aren't necessarily or aren't identical to sources, but in this particular case, you can think of your assets and your sources, i.e. the cash coming in the door, as the same thing, and your liability and your uses, i.e. the cash going out the door, as the same thing. So that would be how to think of a balance sheet. Your sources are your assets, your uses are your liabilities. And if your assets are greater than your liabilities, then what's remaining is your savings. Or if you were an actual corporation, it would be your equity. What do you own? But I'm going to use the word savings right now. At the end of the day, after you tile up all of your assets and you deduct all of your uses, what's left over is your savings. So here's an example of how financial literacy can relate to higher education. And for the most part, that would be college, but it could be something else. It could be a graduate school, it could be a trade school, it could be a management degree if a certificate, something a little bit kind of, I wouldn't say non-traditional, but new. There are new trades and new forms of higher education out there that are not necessarily a 3-year MBA where you have to give up your job and go move to a campus sort of thing. But for the most part, I will actually use just kind of the traditional college undergrad example here. I did it. I took out a student, or actually, yeah, I took out part student loan and also I had a scholarship. But before we get there, so the problem for financial literacy relative to higher education is for the most part, the higher education uses, i.e. the cost of school is greater than what a student can generate from income. If you're an 18-year-old college student and you're trying to handle 15 credit hours a semester, you're not really going to have a time for a full-time job. You're going to have time maybe for a part-time job. But what if you're a collegiate athlete? Well, then you're not going to have a time for a job at all. So if you can get a part-time job and pay off some of your expenses, that's great. But you probably won't be able to pay off the entire cost of going to a higher education. So if it is determined that the expenses for higher education are greater than the income, which is the job that you might have, or even some scholarships that you may have received, then a student loan might be necessary to cover those expenses. Now, a student loan is a form of debt, and it is offered by a number of institutions. And I know there might be some shady stories tied to them, but for the most part, I feel that student loans are a pretty safe form of debt. They don't come with outrageous interest rate fees, but I would say that you actually have to you absolutely need to do your diligence on whomever you're talking to when it comes to a student loan and the terms available, the interest rates available. They're going to be pretty straightforward to understand, I think, at the surface, but then the devil is in the details, so to speak. So do your diligence. And if you find a firm that's offering a student loan, but you can't find a whole lot of research on them online, make sure you read the details because there might be some fine print and some, what's the right word to say? Well, there might be some exceptions to the loan. I'm not saying there's going to be anything that really they can come and take ownership of your degree, like maybe someone could repossess a house, but there will be some things that you just want to make sure you check the box and say, okay, I feel good about this loan. But back to the previous slide, when it comes to forecasting and budgeting, for higher education, I cannot express how important it is to forecast and budget because if you end up taking out a loan for all of your education expenses, well, then you're going to have to pay interest on all of your education expenses. But if you can get a job that offsets some of those expenses, or you can get a scholarship that offsets some of those expenses, then you don't need to borrow a student loan for the entire amount of your education expenses. So not only is your loan cut down, but your interest payments are cut down. So just by a simple effort of forecasting and budgeting, you saved money by purely not borrowing more than you needed to, and you saved that interest expense. And if you have followed the markets, 2 years ago, interest rates were historically very low. They've crept up over the last 2 years, and so all rates, even student loans, are tied to these rates. So just in the last 2 years, all else aside, nothing else has changed. If you were to borrow $20,000 to go to college, your interest rates are going to be at 4, 5, 6, 7, 8% higher than they were 2 years ago. So I don't want to do the math there, but you're basically paying more interest on the same amount of 20,000 than you would 2 or 3 years ago. But if you only had to borrow 10,000 because you had a job that offset the expenses or you had a scholarship, well, then maybe your interest rates would be less than they were 2 years ago. So it's an effort of forecasting, it's an effort of budgeting, of really saying, this is what I need. This is what I need to live by, and my discipline is going to keep me on track, and I'm not going to overspend, and I won't be elevating the stress levels of my life. little tiny here. So here are just some kind of practical tips, I would say. Let's minimize this. And it kind of recaps a lot of what I've said already. But for me, the first thing to do, and I do this every month, is you track your sources and uses. Now, if you have a bank account, then it's pretty easy to download those statements into a Microsoft Excel or a .csv, which is almost like an Excel file. And you can take those straight off of your bank account online and you can put them into a spreadsheet, and they give you the description and they give you the amount. And they might even give you some categories: groceries, gasoline, food. But I actually put my own categories next to them just because I want to make sure that everything is accurate. Sometimes the bank account doesn't get it right. So I use Microsoft Excel, and I said here it requires download and manual input. But once you get the template down, it's actually a pretty easy upload for me every month. But you can also just go straight to a website. There used to be a website called mint.com where you would link your bank accounts. You'd have to input your password, but there are security issues. I never had an issue. Nothing was ever stolen from me. And I actually think mint.com was just recently acquired by Credit Karma. So you could go to Credit Karma, open up a profile. I think Credit Karma gives you your, and you can also track your expenses. And it's a really great tool just to get started. Before I built my spreadsheets, I started with mint.com because it did all the work for you. But then you start to realize that you want to be a little more granular on certain areas, or maybe it kept flagging all of your Amazon charges the same thing, but maybe some Amazon charges are grocery deliveries and others are electronics. So you do really need to get in there sometimes and make sure that the automation is going the way you want it to be. It should never be 100% computer automated. There should be some manual touch, and that should always be your manual touch. But when you're thinking about getting started, think small. So that's why I like mint.com, because it really takes everything and just gives you the straightforward labeling. And then as you start to need more insight and you want more awareness of your financial accounts, that's when you can maybe switch over to a spreadsheet or a Google Sheet and give yourself different types of tags, different types of labels to drill down to actually what you're spending money on. For example, you might drive to a holiday in North Carolina and you want to separate out your holiday expenses from your day-to-day expenses. So maybe that $500 of gasoline that you spend over the year, you don't want to take into account the amount that you had to spend driving to your holiday in North Carolina. So you separate that as maybe not a recurring expense, and you want to be sure that you don't get dinged. And I don't know who would ding you, but it would be more of a personal pride issue of saying, well, I did stick to my budget from a monthly gasoline perspective, but I also took that one trip to North Carolina, but that shouldn't count because it wasn't my monthly expense of $40 to $50. I'd saved a little bit of money and I was able to take that trip without dipping into my savings. So that's why I like to think to start small, but you should keep in the back of your mind that there'll probably be a need to grow your spreadsheet and your columns and your tags as it gets older and gets bigger. And I think I mentioned this earlier too, but everything you're doing, tracking, thinking, being aware, that's great. But it doesn't matter if you don't have the discipline to put it into place. If you tell yourself, okay, I'm going to spend $50 a month on gas, but you spend 100, well, then your tracking and your budgeting didn't really do any purpose. The discipline is saying, okay, I've already driven enough this month to hit $45, $50. Maybe I don't need to make those extra couple drives. Maybe I should wait till next month to go out and do my errands, because that's when my gasoline will kick into my next month's budget. It's having the awareness of saying, okay, I think I'm creeping up on my monthly budget. And do I have the discipline to say no to still spending money right now instead of waiting next month or next paycheck or next time I have more money in the account to keep my balance and my budget on track? So it really does just come down to the word discipline. And I could say that 1,000 times, but I won't. I'll just leave you there and understand that no matter what else goes on, it's on you to actually make the decisions. And so knowing when to save and on what to spend, that's really the key. You might have the biggest craving for a holiday present. Maybe you should start saving for that now in January. A couple bucks a month now doesn't make that big of a dent, but $200 in December, you might feel that. But 10 bucks a month up until December, well, there's 120 that you saved. And to me, I think of things in terms of food. If a meal costs $10 to $15 and you're able to take one meal off or make something at home and not go out, well, then that's 5, $10. And I even go as far on this last bullet here to think, okay, President Elliott wants that cookie, or President Elliott wants to make that decision or buy that item right now. For example, I was thinking about buying a new Google Pixel watch, cost about $300. I don't need it. It would have been more of just kind of a treat to myself over the holidays. But instead, what I did was I took $300 out of my checking account, and I just put it into my savings account. So I actually moved $300, but I didn't buy anything with it. I moved it over to a savings account because I wanted to think of future Elliott. And I do this a lot, and I learned it off a TV show, and it doesn't work for everybody, but you have to find what works for you. And what works for me is thinking in terms of, well, I have present Elliott right here, but then I also have future Elliott. And future Elliott wants to take vacations, and future Elliott wants to be able to live a stress-free life when it comes to finances. And so if you can think in terms of future Elliott or future you to make that person happier than the present you, then you'll have a good awareness of really where you need to put your money. But if you've been jonesing for a steak dinner for 6 months and you fed up and you want that steak dinner now, well, now future Elliott is present Elliott, and you deserve to have that steak dinner. But if there's certain things that just popped into your mind and you impulsively want to do it, try to take a step back and think about, well, I could spend that money right now, or I could move that money from one account to the other, and I could wait for future Elliott to really be happy and have that money later at his use. I'm going to try to take a trip this summer to Europe. And so certain things that I'm doing right now, instead of spending money on little things at the grocery store, I could say, well, I walked out of the grocery store and I didn't spend money on 3 items that would have cost $25. And so what I do right away is I go into my app and I move $25 from my checking account to my savings account. I do it all the time. Not everybody does it. I've talked to friends about this. Some of them think it's weird, but I don't. I think it's a smart idea, because if you get that money out of your checking account and you move it to an account that you don't look at every day, not only is it growing interest and gaining a little bit of revenue on its own, but it gets your mind thinking more about the future and really what's important that you really want to save money toward. If you have the money now and you don't have the discipline, then you're going to impulse buy something, and maybe you'll be happy for 10 minutes or a day, but I think in the long term, you're not going to be as proud of that purchase as you would if you had moved it into savings and spent it on something in the future that you really did care and think about. So that kind of leads into the next, is your spending habits. I'm sorry, I keep jumping down. When it comes to spending, I said it earlier, you have sources and uses. And as long as your sources are greater than your uses, you'll be a happy place. And what I think about is, well, what's a margin? So if you make $100 and you spend 90, that means you have $10 left over. $10 out of your original 100 is 10%. And I think of that as a 10% margin. I saved 10% of my money. That's a good number. Some people, I think, save 30, 40, 50%. I think 10 is just a safe number. It's easy to understand. Whatever you have, you take off the last zero, and that's 10%. So it's kind of easy to back into, okay, well, this is how much I'd like to keep at the end of the day. And you can do that as easily as if you get a paycheck and that paycheck is direct deposited into your bank account. Most employers, most payroll systems have the option to split your paycheck. You could say, I want most of it to go into my checking account, but I could actually direct a smaller portion, maybe 10% or maybe bigger, up to 20 or 30 or 50. I can direct that other portion into my savings account. So every day or every 2 weeks or every month, I'm sorry, when you are paid, the majority of that money can go into your checking account. That can pay your monthly expenses like your rent or your mortgage or your gasoline. But without even thinking about it, without even doing anything, the employer and the bank does everything. Some of that money goes right into savings and you don't even see it and you don't even think about it. And then you check it every couple months, and next thing you know, it's bigger than you thought because it was earning interest. And every 2 weeks, some money got sent to that savings account. And then when you want to make your first car payment or down payment on a car or take that vacation, you don't have to dip into your checking account. You can go to your savings, and you could even just say, hey, I made $250 on interest alone this year. I'm just going to spend that $250. So it's money that you didn't even really had to earn. It was just there from saving your money and begin with, the interest. You could then use that to buy a plane ticket or even maybe a nice steak dinner that you've been treating yourself for. So it's little things of just kind of tricking your brain to saying, well, I'm getting the money in, but I can still put it somewhere before I even see it. And then it goes back to the discipline of making sure that you don't go touch it. If you want to put some money on a football game, for example, you shouldn't dip into your savings to do that. That should be something that's in your checking account because that is a use of cash. It might be a hobby and maybe it generates income, but I still would not put my savings into my gambling bets. I would put my cash and my checking into my gambling. A few things, and I actually wasn't sure if this should go on this page, but I just wanted to throw out because I mentioned it on a previous page. Scholarships are a fantastic way to pay for higher education. And there are not just athletic scholarships, there are not just academic scholarships. There are, excuse me, there are other corporate scholarships out there that do a lot for just a personality perspective. Are you a good steward of your community? Are you a volunteer? Are you an artist looking to perfect a craft in college that maybe has a difficult program from an artistic perspective that you want to get into? There are different types of scholarships out there based on what you were trying to accomplish from higher education. And the one that I would think I'd point everybody to is studentaid.gov. But another website that I actually met through a similar entrepreneurial startup about 8 years ago is a girl named Jocelyn who runs the scholarshipsystem.com. And she has a fantastic webinar that helps people understand exactly what scholarships are available for me and how do I write my essay to attract the right reception to this scholarship application, because every single scholarship is not just thrown out to whomever asks for it. You have to prove your worth, and for the most part, that comes in the form of an essay. So be prepared that no matter where you apply for for higher education, you are likely going to have a number of essays requested. And if you just submit the same essay or the same personal memo to every single application, the people reading those applications on the other end, they're going to read right through, oh, this is just a canned answer that they sent to every single application. So it's as if you're applying for a job. You can submit your resume, which is the same for every job, and a cover letter, but the cover letter has to be tailored to the particular job that you're applying to. I would say that's the same when it comes to scholarships. You might be able to have your transcripts and even your resume of what you've done from an academic perspective. But if you're applying for a scholarship, I can't even think of the best examples right now, but if you're applying for two different types of scholarships from two different organizations, please be sure to write two different essays. You can share data from the two. It's going to be a similar story, but please make sure that you have actually put in the name of the institution that's requesting the scholarship application from you, why you think you relate to that particular institution. You have to make it personal. I don't think anybody out there, I've met plenty of people who have been awarded a number of scholarships in their life, and I think it all came down to one thing. That person was a good person, and the scholarship they received also recognized that fact. They were going after something they were passionate about, and they were able to write that message in their application and receive the scholarship as such. And even after you receive your scholarship, I'm pretty sure most of them require certain checkpoints. You have to finish school. You have to have a certain grade point average. You have to write testimonials of what you're doing in school that apply to the scholarship in the essay that you wrote to get the scholarship. So you can't just say, I want to be a volunteer and then go to college and never volunteer. Most people check in on you and make sure you're living the life that you wrote about in the essay. So keep that in mind, because I think there are a lot of scholarships available out there. And I think, kind of like I said earlier, there's a job for everybody. I would say at this point, there's probably a scholarship for everybody. So the scholarshipsystem.com, great place to check, but I think studentaid.gov, probably the first place to check just from a financial resource perspective. So here are some of my parting thoughts, but I also know I've got some questions that Deja asked as well. When it comes to financial milestones and success, it kind of goes back to my first statement of what I define as financial literacy from an individual perspective, because financial milestones and success should be individual. They should not be, you should not be trying to match my financial milestones or what I define as financial success. Whatever you want to live, as long as your sources are greater than your uses, then you're doing something right. Let me say it differently. If you were spending more than you're making, you're doing something wrong. But if you can keep some money in the bank, whether it's savings, whether it's investing, you're doing something right. And don't let anybody tell you that you're not, because it is very, very difficult to keep the discipline nowadays to not overspend, to live within your means. There are so many available options. I was online the other day just looking at Teslas, and I had no idea how easy it is to buy a Tesla. You can buy a Tesla in probably 5 clicks. So an impulse buyer out there is probably one day just buying a Tesla and then realizing they didn't need it. Scale that all the way back to Amazon. You go to Amazon on any day and you could probably walk away after spending $20 or $30 without really knowing it. Kind of like going into a grocery store for one thing, coming out with 10 things. So it's having the discipline to say, I don't need that, because it would mean my uses are greater than my sources. And at the end of the day, the most important thing from a financial literacy perspective to keep that stress level low is to make sure your sources are not greater than your uses. Or sorry, your sources are greater than your uses. Another thing is, it kind of relates to debt, but compound interest is your friend. So if you can save money and you can put it away and not touch it, the longer you put it away, the more it will accumulate. And I actually did write a little example down here, but if you put $100 into a savings account that earns 5% annually, that's $5 a year. So at the end of year one, you would have $105. But it doesn't necessarily mean at the end of year two, you're going to have another $5. So you'll have 110. You'll actually grow to $5.25 in year two, because you're growing off of 105, not off 100. So that's what compound interest means. The money you keep in your bank and that you accumulate in interest is now your money that can then serve as the base for then growing more interest. So if you were to take money out and you took $5 out every year, well, then you would only make $5 every year. But if you kept your $5 in and then you kept your 525 in, well, then you might have $5.51 after year three. Small pickings, I get it, but if you were to make that 100,000 or 200,000 or even $1 million, sometimes people can just live off their interest on their own. They don't even need to really dip into their principal. They make so much in accumulated interest and compounded interest that serves their life right away. And I would say that is probably the definition of living within your means. So I don't know if that's a financial milestone or a goal, but it's certainly a nice way to be, okay, I'm living a life with as little stress as possible. If my accumulated compound interest is serving even if it isn't all my expenses, maybe certain expenses are covered with your compound interest, just your recurring monthly expenses, or maybe your property taxes, something like that, where you can say, okay, this expense of my life is covered with this compound interest, and that's all I got to think about. Now, if you start saying, well, my compound interest is going to cover all four of these things, when in reality it only covers one, that's when you become a little disillusioned. You have to be disciplined and say, well, if compound interest is earning X over here, and I'm only allocating it to Y, that's all I'm allowed to allocate it to. I can't say, well, I've got X, Y, and Z over here, because it really won't cover all three things. It only covers one. So it goes back to being disciplined. You can't say, oh, I've got money and I can spend it on whatever I want. It's, I've got money and that's what it's allocated towards, and that's the end of the story. And a final parting thought that Deja kind of alluded to earlier is, debt is not your enemy. Debt is a very, very helpful tool to grow in a direction that you want to grow, whether that's as a homeowner, whether that is as a vehicle owner, whether that might be a business loan to start a company. If you have a goal of pursuing a path, debt can help you get there. But before I go into these big ticket items of debt, let me tell you what I don't love about debt. I don't love that people use credit card debt as a crutch to get away with everyday expenses. So let me say something differently. I believe in a mortgage. I think a house mortgage or a car loan or even a small business loan to start a company, those are good forms of debt. I do not think that you should take your everyday monthly financials and put them on your credit card and never pay them off right away. Anything that I put on my credit card, I pay off every month. I've never in my life had a credit card balance after over 2 months, I should say. I've forgotten to pay some monthlies, but anything that you put on your credit card as a day-to-day, you should treat like a debit card. Now, if you do want to miss a payment because you hear that builds up your credit, that's a good thing. And we'll get into credit in the next slide. But for the most part, things that you're putting on your credit card should be paid off every month. I don't think that credit card debt is a very good form of debt because that can accumulate quickly and those interest rates are a little bit higher. But credit card is not necessarily what I think of when I think of as debt. I think of credit card as just an electronic transaction that is basically like a debit card or a PayPal because it comes straight out of my bank account, maybe not on that day, but by the end of the month, and goes back to planning because I settle up at the end of every month. At the end of every month, all my credit card balances, well, I only have one card, but my credit card balance is zero. And that's something else I would agree with. I don't think you need multiple credit cards. You just need one or maybe two. One is a primary, one is a backup. But don't spread anything across multiple cards. Don't try to stretch yourself thin. That is not good financial literacy. That is not good discipline. Good financial literacy, good discipline is keeping everything on one card, knowing what you're spending, and paying it off every month so that you can make sure you're not paying anything on interest that shouldn't be paid. When it comes to credit score, and I didn't have this on the slides, but I did mention it, your credit score is an indicator of not your financial literacy, but of your financial health. And it's an indicator from three different bureaus. I think Experian is one. I can't think of the other two. But if you open a Credit Karma account, that is not one of them. Credit Karma would tell you your credit score, but it'll pull in the credit reports from the other three bureaus like Experian and Equifax, and I can't think of the third now. But your credit score is anything between, I think the bottom number is 300 and the highest number is 850. And if you have good credit, which means you pay off all your debts and you've never missed a payment and you've never filed for bankruptcy and you've never been sued or had to been sued for fraud or anything like that. If you have a very good credit, I would guess your score is probably higher than 750, 725. So if you have a credit score between 725 and I think 850 is the max, you're going to get one of the best loans you could get. You go to a Bank of America or you go to Truist, formerly known as SunTrust, and you ask for a car payment, you ask for a mortgage, you're going to get the best rate that they can give you. If your credit score is lower than that because you've missed payments in the past, because you filed for bankruptcy, because you've had a lien on your car or anything like that, if your credit score is under 700, for example, you're going to get a higher interest rate on your mortgage. If your credit card is under 600 or even under 500, you might not even get a loan. And if you do, the rates are going to be really high. Actually, I would say 600 and 500, you'll probably still get a loan. But if you drip below in the 300, 400s, you might not even be offered a loan. And if you do, you might have to go to a special situation, not a Bank of America or not a SunTrust. You might have to go to another form of financial institution. And not only will they give you, sorry, they may not even give you the loan, but if they do, you're going to get it with a higher interest rate. So your credit score is an indicator of your financial health. And the outcome of that indicator is how easily you can borrow money and at what rate you can borrow money. If you have a great credit score, over 700, over 750, you can borrow money very easily and you're going to get the best rates available. If you have a bad credit score, you may not even be allowed to borrow money. But if you do, it's going to be at very unfavorable terms and it's going to take you longer to pay off those terms. So that's what I go back by the credit card statement. I think a credit card where you don't pay off your monthly balance is the easiest way to kill your credit score. If you do pay off your monthly balance and maybe miss a month every once in a while so that you actually can prove to the credit card company, hey, I missed a payment, but no big deal. I still paid it off a month later. I've heard rumors. I don't know the math exactly, but I do think that that helps your credit score, or at least it doesn't hurt it. So maybe every couple months or twice a year, you wait a month and you pay your balance off the next month. But to carry balances over and over and over every month, it's kind of the inverse effect of what a compound interest does when you're saving money. When you're just carrying over and over, well, then you're end up spending more and more money on interest than you should have if you just paid off your balance every month. So debt is not your enemy for the big items, a house, a car, a company. Debt is your enemy for your day-to-day items. If you have to put your day-to-day items on hold and pay them off later, then you do not have the best financial discipline. I would say you don't have the best awareness of your expenses and therefore not the strongest financial literacy. I am done with my slides, but I was actually given a couple questions that I'll just kind of kick off. But by all means, if anybody has anything to say, feel free to come in. But I'll start off with one that someone asked, and it's when should I develop my first budget and how? You should develop your first budget today. take a napkin, take a sticky note, and just write some stuff down on it. And that's how it starts. Quiz yourself, test yourself to say, can I think off the top of my head, and then can I write down without looking at anything on my computer? Can I write down all of my sources of cash and all of my uses of cash? Can I identify all my jobs? Probably pretty easy to do. The hard part is identifying all of your expenses. It's those hidden expenses that you have. Maybe it's a newspaper subscription. Maybe it's a Google Play or a YouTube or a Netflix subscription that you haven't checked. It's these little things that just add up over the years that if you can get your head wrapped around them and you're aware of them and you actually need them and justify spending money on them, or if you don't need them and you can cancel them, that's a good step in the right direction. Whether or not it impacts your long-term financial health, I don't know. But if you can start to make those decisions of saying, hey, look, I'm spending $8 a month on Netflix and I never watch it. I know it's only $100 a year. That's not the right mentality. It's, hey, I've identified an expense that I don't need in my life. And let me save that $8 a month. And instead of not touching it, let me actually do something better. Let me take $8 a month and put it into my savings account. Be proactive on the other side. Don't just be dormant and settle and let everything just kind of drip out. Be proactive and cancel the subscription and then actually do something with that money instead. Don't go from Spotify to YouTube. That's a net of zero. If you go from Spotify and not spending the 8, or maybe it's 10 now, to actually saving it, well, in 2 years, you've got $250 saved that you probably never would have really appreciated that you did save if you just kind of kept spending it for Spotify every month and logging in maybe every couple of weeks. Some common that would be my answer to the question, when should you start your budget? I would say today. Just go home tonight, pull out a napkin and try to write everything down. And if you can, put 2 columns. What do you spend and what do you want to spend? And see how close those are. And then maybe put it in a drawer and come back in a month and see how you did. You don't need to be on top of this every single day, but I think at the beginning, you need to be disciplined enough to at least check it and be honest with yourself. So what are some common financial mistakes that teenagers should avoid? So I kind of alluded this. I say debt is not your enemy, but a mistake that a teenager should avoid, as a mistake that anybody should avoid, in my opinion, but particularly teenagers, is growing into the routine of, okay, I can just put everything on my credit card and not pay it off. That sort of debt is your enemy. So avoid falling into the credit card trap right away. I didn't get my first credit card until I was 24, 25. I went through college on a debit card. Maybe that was my parents not trusting me, or maybe it was a tool of saying you don't need to spend what you don't have. A debit card is a great way to get started because you cannot spend more than you have. A credit card is almost teasing you to spend more than you have, and it's testing your discipline. So don't lose that test. Make sure that you only spend what you have, and no matter what credit card you sign up for, the interest rate should not be a real deciding factor for you because it shouldn't be an issue. You should pay off your card every month. If you're going to travel and you want to fly, go get an airline credit card. I have a Delta card. If you want cash back, go get a Capital One. But don't really deter from a credit card because it has a 30% interest rate, because that shouldn't be a problem for you. You should pay it off every month. Don't fall into the trap of just saying, okay, I'll buy now and pay later. I read a quote that the Black Friday event after Thanksgiving, the holiday shopping event, it was the largest ever of people buying now and paying later, which basically means they were borrowing money to pay what they wanted today, and then they would pay back that balance later with interest. That to me is like a credit card. Now, unless you bought a car or a house, if you're just buying TVs and Game Boys, that sort of stuff, in my opinion, should be a one-time expense, not pay off over time expense. So don't get into the mindset that you can pay everything off over time. If you have money in your account, you should pay it off now and then be diligent the next couple of weeks or months to save your money to get back to where you were before you had that expense. Another common mistake that teenagers should avoid, and I would also say this for everybody, if you have a job that pays you money and that money goes directly into your bank account, I'm 99% certain that that option will also have the ability for you to split that direct deposit, and you can put money into your checking account, and you should also put money into your savings account. It's called direct deposit, and you'd be a fool not to take advantage of allocating some of your paycheck into a savings account from direct deposit. You don't even have to think about it after you just set that allocation on day one. I think I've gone anywhere in my career between 5 to 20% of my paycheck goes into my savings account. I've never had a zero number go in. I've always put something into my savings. I think it just depends on where I am in that life and what my near-term goals are. But at the very least, 5% of my money, of every paycheck, goes into my savings account. And you can even go as far sometimes if you have retirement accounts like a 401k, that money can go in pre-tax. We won't get into that today because I don't know if that really is too important. But the idea of understanding that you can put money away in savings and not think about it and let it grow and accumulate over time, that's a very good mindset to be in. Because I think if you can have the discipline of saying, I don't touch that money. It's a rule. I don't touch my savings unless it's a certain expense that I've already self-approved, and everything in my checking account is for me. That is a very good rule and mindset to get into. And I would say if you can follow that, then your discipline is pretty strong already.
Elliot,
I think that would really be all I have to cover right now. I've seen some questions pop up here. Oh, okay. But I'll let Deja kind of come back in here, and even Tatiana, if you want to, if there's anything I've missed or if there are questions from the group. I know I didn't really specifically talk about higher education other than that one slide. So if there's anything that you want to kind of hone in on, let me know. But for the most part, that was really all I had to share. And now I'm just happy to have a conversation.
thank you, Elliot. Can you hear me?
Yes,
I
we
can't
can hear
hear
you,
anybody.
Tisha.
Oh, there you go. Okay.
Oh, okay, perfect. I want to thank you for sharing all this wonderful information and really great financial advice. I have a question for you, kind of piggybacking off of the last thing that you said about like common mistakes, especially with credit, and then you talked about automated savings. Say after you have your savings automated and you're doing it consistently enough to, you can expect that you're going to keep doing it. You can rely on yourself. What would be the next like helpful financial milestone that someone young and just starting out should think about, right? Where do you go after you've automated your savings?
That's a good question. So for me, I use Bank of America. I use Bank of America for my checking account and then my savings account. So my paycheck goes to Bank of America, majority goes into checking, and then a portion goes into savings. And that adds up to 100%. But then once you've got a good grip on your savings, you can keep it in your savings account, or then you can move it into what I would call a brokerage account, a stock investing account. And that is something that I have with Schwab. You may have heard of Schwab or Fidelity or TD Ameritrade, any of these kind of online, I think there's like E-Trade, all these others, they're getting bought up. But moving from savings to investing, I would say is an appropriate next step. I don't know if I would call this a goal. I don't know if I'd call it a milestone, but I think it's an appropriate next step to say, okay, I've got a good grip on my money. I feel comfortable that I'm saving a good amount every month, and I can even maybe take a portion of that and try to grow it. So savings account, it'll grow, but not substantially. A brokerage account, there are options. You can put it into different sorts of securities, different sorts of channels, I'll just say, of ways to grow. And some of them are kind of passive where you don't really need to look at it every day. And then others are pretty active where you maybe buy a stock and you want to check it every day, like a Tesla. Or maybe you buy an index fund that follows an index like the Dow Jones or the S&P 500. And so that way you don't really have to check your portfolio. You can go to Google Finance and say, oh, the S&P 500 is up. My portfolio is up. But if you really want to look into something like a day trading stock or maybe try to pick some winners there, don't just jump in and file and do it blindly. I'd go back to what I started off by saying, get a forecast together, get a budget, say how much money do I want to invest. Don't just pick one company or one particular security. Try to diversify and pick a few and convince yourself why you like certain securities and let's just use stocks. Pick Facebook, Apple, Intel, and Microsoft, 4 stocks, and tell yourself what you like about each, what you don't like about each, why some are better than the others, and challenge your assumptions. And then maybe spend $50 on each, because you can't buy a single share of every company. That's the tricky thing with investing, that you actually have to go in and purchase the stocks yourself. When you put money into savings, it'll just grow behind the scenes. But if you want to invest in the stock market, you have to actually make manual choices. You have to go in and decide, okay, today's the day I'm going to buy, and that's the price I'm going to buy. Today's the day I'm going to sell, and that's the price. So it takes a little bit more of a knowledge of what you think are good prices to buy and sell. But it is the next step, I would say, beyond saving. So don't be afraid of it. And that's probably a completely other webinar, and not just a webinar, it's books and careers and classes and anything that people want to know about how to invest. But I would say don't go to the investing step of the equation until you really do have a good grip on what you feel are your savings and your awareness of your sources and uses. Don't start investing, even though some people do it. And I said it on the earlier slide, they go straight to investing. I think the safest approach is don't start investing until you have a really good grip on your financial forecasting and budgeting and your savings. Don't start putting money into the stock market if you're going to start going, if you have a student loan coming up or if you have a big trip coming up, for example. You don't want to take money away from that. You want to make sure that you're still staying disciplined on what your goals were. But if you got money left over and you have some, I'll call it a thesis, if you have an opinion or a view on the stock market and you want to test it, go for it. I absolutely support it. There was 1,000 classes you could take, but there are more people out there that just learned how to trade and invest on their own. And I'm not one of those people. I'm not a day trader. But I think more importantly, I know myself and I know I'm not a day trader. And I did try it for a few times and realized this is not for me. So that might be the exercise you need to do. It might cost you some money. So don't ever invest what you're not willing to lose, just like you would never go to a casino if you weren't willing to lose all the chips in your pocket. But you will learn something. You will learn something about what the fundamentals are that you need to look at from a stock market perspective. You'll learn about what different variables and metrics and earnings per share and enterprise value to stock price, all these different multiples in the market you'll learn. But don't even go there until you've got a good grip on savings.
Do you have any advice about paying off student loans, or say you took out what you needed to take out and you finished school? What next?
I do have advice. I would say sooner you can pay off your loan, the better. That's just a personal opinion. But if you have a really good rate, and I don't really know the rates are now. I'm just going to throw them out there. But if you've got a rate maybe under 5%, not even sure that's possible. But if you have a rate somewhere where it's under 5%, maybe you don't pay it off. But if you have a higher rate and it's just accumulating, and these loans last a long time, 10, 20, 30 years, I think. If you just don't want that cloud hanging over your head, then get rid of it. But if you're comfortable with it and it's just another form of debt that you have to cut a small check, and small is relative, but if it's small to you, then maybe you don't need to pay it off. One thing I would not say is don't rely on the federal government waiving off your loan, which I think just happened in the past year. I don't think that's a safe bet to go live your life by. That, oh, I don't have to pay this loan back because the federal government will just waive it one day and I won't have to. You should assume that no matter what, you will have to pay your loan back. I don't know the answer to this, but you should absolutely look into if there is a prepayment penalty. I don't think there should be. I don't think they exist on home mortgages anymore. But what that means is, say you borrow $20,000 for a student loan and you owe 10,000. Well, some people might say if you pay that 10,000 back right now, you have to pay a penalty because you should have paid it back over 15 years and that should have come with interest. I don't think that's still an issue. And if it is, you should go somewhere else and borrow your money from somewhere else because I don't think that's an issue. So paying back your loan right away, as long as it doesn't incur a penalty and you want that dark cloud off your, which is what I did with my master's degree. I got a bonus one year and I paid off my loans right away. So basically I didn't get a bonus, but I didn't have any more debt. And in my head, I felt so much better. I felt better because I had zero debt. Even though I gave up my bonus, it was worth it to me. And so I think it's making those personal decisions. And it goes back to what I said, your success and your milestones are your success and your milestones. They are not anyone else's. You can't look at somebody else's life and their car and their house and their job and think you want that. What makes you happy? What makes you content? And I'll go back to this for the rest of my life, probably. If you're working in finance or you're dealing with numbers, what keeps your stress levels at a minimum?
So I actually have a question I wanted to ask.
Yes,
Uh,
please.
Okay. So I know earlier you were talking about how you didn't really have a credit card until after college. So you went through college mostly with a debit card. And I'm wondering, how was it like learning financial literacy throughout the early stages in your life, especially being like in your early 20s?
Oh, a good question. It was a little different. I'm actually joking because in college, for me, cash was still very big. I would go out with a credit card, but I always had cash on me. I always had at least $50 of bills. And that was as a 20-year-old college student. I don't even know if I have $50 on me now because everything is so digital. So I think it was a little bit, I don't know if it was easier or harder, but you were forced in some regards to say, well, if I only have $50, that's all I can physically spend. I have no choice but to spend 50 or less. So it kind of forces you into thinking that way. And I had buddies who would, to be disciplined, they would not take their debit card with them out.
That's really muted, okay? Yeah, it's gonna cost me. I know.
I don't know here, but yeah, it was be more of like, I'm not going to spend money tonight, so I'm not going to bring my
Come
debit
here.
card with me. Oop. So then the other form of that would be, okay, well, you keep it kind of in your back pocket, so to speak. Maybe you go out with a $20 bill and that's what you have to start with, or you walk into the grocery store with $50 and that's what you have to spend. I think it really comes down to, I don't think tricking yourself is the right way, but it's testing yourself. It's testing yourself of saying, can I actually come out of this grocery store spending $25 in my hand? If I go in with $25, I have no choice but to spend $25. If I go in with a credit card, knowing myself in a grocery store, I might be coming out with $25 worth of Oreos or ice cream on any given day for me. So it's kind of testing yourself with the tools you have. I'd say even nowadays you have a phone with so many mobile apps that can just pay for stuff too. I'm not suggesting you leave your phone at home, but that's another option that probably it could make it harder to be disciplined. If you have cash, a debit card, and your phone, and all of these can buy things, it might be a little bit harder, or maybe it's a better example of really enforcing your discipline. But it goes back to what I originally said, Armand. You got to be aware. You got to be aware of what your sources and uses are. And thank you for asking this question, because you also need to be aware of the ways you can pay. If you have 3 credit cards and a PayPal account and a Venmo account, and a Zelle and a Cash App, and everyone's asking for money all which ways, that's fine as long as you can manage it all. So I don't keep any money in my PayPal. I don't keep any money in my Venmo. Everything links to my checking so that every dollar comes out of my checking so that I see it. I don't have anything in my Venmo or PayPal because I can. If you ever heard of the story Enron and how they went bankrupt in the early 2000s, they did it because they hid their losses in other corporations. They call it off balance sheet. That's what I call my Venmo and my PayPal. It's money that I can't really count as my own. It's fun money. I got it because I gave someone a concert ticket and they paid me $50, and now I'm just sitting on a random $50. So it's sort of kind of, all right, well, that's my funny money. I can maybe spend that on something I wouldn't normally spend it on, like another concert ticket or maybe a DVD movie or something like that online. But it's knowing that, okay, that's not my day-to-day action. That's money that I have in my PayPal account that I'm allowed, I can cheat with, so to speak. But what you keep on your actual checking account and in your day-to-day tools, like your wallet and your credit card, it really does need to have some sort of a discipline. And I think testing yourself is probably the right way of thinking about it. Your college days, you learn a lot about your education, but you learn probably more about yourself and what your habits are, particularly what your spending habits can be. And you don't necessarily need to fix them. I think you just need to be aware of them, and you need to identify these are the certain things that I like and I enjoy. And if you think they're unhealthy and if you think they're going down a bad path, well, then maybe it's the time to fix them. But I think the most important thing really is just being aware of what you like to spend your money on.
All right. And I actually also have another question building off of that. So, even right now in your day-to-day life, do you still how do I explain it? Do you like feel the impacts of having this financial literacy like really well, or is this something that even you sometimes can find yourself struggling with occasionally on some purchases?
Oh, yeah, no, I think that's a great question because I can feel both ways. I work in finance, so in some regards, I have to remind myself that I have a little bit of a leg up because it's my day to day. I live in spreadsheets. Every day I'm working in multiple spreadsheets. And so for me to manage my own expenses and for me to be aware of what's coming and going is easier for me than it is for others. And so I have to take that with a grain of salt of saying, I can't just tell you, hey, go build a spreadsheet. It's easy, because I know it might not be. But for me, it is. And that's why my success and my milestones are for me personally. But then there are times where I do get flustered and I say, well, gosh, should I be in the market? Should I be investing in crypto? Should I be doing all these things that everyone else is talking about? And you kind of have to come back and check yourself and go to say, well, am I interested? Can I learn it? Can I really invest my time into it? And if so, what would my budget say is an ample amount of time for me to put into this effort? If I wanted to go buy Bitcoin or Ethereum tomorrow, I would not just go buy a random amount. I'd go build a spreadsheet and I'd say, here's what I think is an appropriate amount for me to spend on these two assets or securities, whatever you want to call crypto right now. But it wouldn't be just an impulse decision. Whatever I've learned in my day-to-day life has taught me never make an impulse decision with finance. Even if I buy something right away, I've been thinking about it for a couple months or a couple years. But on a bigger, I would say that's more of kind of a near term or kind of a nearsighted purchase. From a car or a house or maybe a small business loan for buying a company, I think my financial literacy has definitely given me confidence in those areas. I can build my own car schedule and I know how much I'm paying back every month, and I can build my own debt schedule of what, hey, if I get a mortgage at this rate or I get a mortgage at that rate, what would my two payments be? Maybe some homes have different insurance rates. If you're living in Florida, there's a lot of buzz right now about roofing insurance and how expensive that is and how it's skyrocketing, and that's a stress. But I have a financial literacy that allows me to understand, okay, well, how exactly does that increase in insurance on my home for the roof impact the overall financial picture? And 5, 10 years ago, I probably couldn't have done that. Even though I'd been working in finance for about 10 years at that point, I probably still couldn't tell you the impact of a mortgage and the insurance and the roof. So you're always learning, you're always kind of rounding out your knowledge when it comes to finance. But I think when you actually start living actual examples, like getting a credit card when I'm 25 or buying a house when I was 30, that's when you really start to appreciate, okay, this is how it impacts every decision in my life. But at least I had a pretty good foundation going into that. I would say it probably made it a lot less stressful. I've already sold my house, but I'll never forget, I didn't have a single day of buyer remorse when I owned my house. And that was a good feeling. And I know a lot of people in the past year or so have bought houses who have regretted it immediately. And so to me, it's not saying they don't have financial literacy, but maybe they didn't have strong financial literacy because they ended up buying and moving into a house that they immediately regretted. And that's probably something with a little bit more forecasting and budgeting that they could have avoided. It's pretty subjective opinion, but I think it probably holds some truth to it.
Okay, actually, so you were just talking about these people that make these decisions that they regret. What's your best advice in these situations if you end up making this kind of decision?
Well, I mean, you can back out of it and sell your house. I think the regret really comes from a big item like buying a house. I think if you were to buy a car, I don't necessarily know if that's the biggest regret. And even if it is, you could get out of buying a car a lot easier than you can get out of buying a house. I think the regret comes to maybe, for example, with the buying a house, people move in and they're happy and they've got that roof over their head and they understood the interest payment, but maybe they didn't understand all the closing fees. Maybe they didn't understand the investment it would be required to make their house prettier, like a new air conditioning unit or a new dishwasher or a new washer and dryer. So we call that diligence or research. It's really getting all the nitty gritty it's understanding all the nitty gritty of what you're about to put your money into. And if you're going to buy a house, that's why you have a home inspection. And that's why you have people come over and say, well, we're not so sure about the foundation here. We might need to take a few bucks off because we need to put new floors in. And even after all of that, I think people maybe wanted to buy the house because that's just what they felt like they had to do. And we're maybe shifting gears a little bit towards the American dream. But I think that when people move into a mindset that they're fixated on their next step, and it has to be their next step, like buying a car, getting a job, buying a house. I think sometimes people go down that path because it's the definition of success for somebody else. And maybe they thought, okay, this is what I need because this is what everybody else has. But if they really said, is this what I can afford right now? Is this the right thing for me? Is it the right area? Is it the right price? If they'd asked themselves the tougher questions, I don't know how many people would have ended up buying a house this past year. I think people maybe felt rushed, maybe felt pressured because prices were rising, rates were rising, and everybody else they knew bought a home or they had to buy a house because that's just what the American dream is. And now they're regretting it. I think that's what people maybe they could have asked themselves some tougher questions ahead of that. Again, all subjective, but I do think that this past year has been a much different indicator of people's financial decisions than the previous 5, 6, 7, 20 even.
I will give one last question, and then I think we have to wrap up because we're getting near the end of
Okay.
our time. But on that note, do you have any advice on how someone should figure out what their, personal values are or what their milestones are? You mentioned like you might buy a house because you think you should buy a house, right? You might get a new car because you think you should get a new car. How do you go about figuring out what is important for you personally to spend your money on? Um,
Well, I'll give you an answer, but I could probably think a day and give you a completely different answer. So for now, my answer would be if you back into that question, if you back into, okay, I'm going to go to higher education and I'm going to take classes and I'm going to try to figure out what I want for my career. And if you use that as an example, and like I said earlier, there's probably a career for everybody at this point. Everything has some sort of job or responsibility tied to it, whether it's making, I'm looking at things on my desk, calculators or phones or pens, or it's as much as data science or artificial intelligence or food and beverage or attorneys. I think everybody out there really has a desire to be something. And if you back into what that is and you think about in your day to day, you might not need to know what you want to be yet. I'm sorry, that's what I meant to say. You're in college and you have an idea of what you want to be, but it might not be true. For example, I'm not a doctor, even though for 23 years, 22 years, I thought that was the path I was on. And then my last year of college, I said, nope, don't want to do it. But what I realized at that time, I don't want to be a doctor because my heart isn't in it. My heart is in numbers. My heart is in building. At this point, I wasn't building, but my heart was in understanding what goes into a company and how do you really make it grow. I wanted to learn about the business side of things. And maybe that was because I hadn't really touched on many classes in college. But at 22, I was really interested in how the world worked, how the business world really generated different, excuse me, business to business commerce, business to consumer commerce, business to business through consumer commerce. There were all these different angles that I was fascinated by that I was kind of shielded with because I was taking so many science classes. But it wasn't until I got my first internship and it wasn't until I started to think, oh, college is almost done, job market's around the corner. What is it that I really enjoy about the world? I started to look inside and say it's not healthcare and it's not medicine for me personally. It's nice. I would love to be able to say, yes, I can give you CPR. Yes, I can fix your broken arm, but my heart wasn't in it. And I think that was a very good realization for me because I did not want to spend the next 8 years of medical school if my heart wasn't in it. And so I'm not saying you've got to find your passion, but I think you need to give yourself some checkpoints of saying, okay, I'm going down this path, but am I really in it? Is my heart really devoted to this path of maybe a career choice? Just as is my heart really devoted to buying this house, or is it more devoted to matching somebody else's roadmap or somebody else's life plan? Make decisions for yourself. And if you don't know what it is you want to do, I think that's probably a better thing than knowing exactly what it is you want to do, because that means to me, you're open-minded and you're willing to explore. Before I joined my current job at Ansley Capital Group, I didn't have a single job more than 2 years. Everything I did was on a 2-year cycle. And that's how finance works, more or less. You kind of get these training programs and you can go 2 years and then you can stick around or you can move to another job or another company. And that's what I chose to do because I said, there's more things I want to learn. So I've worked in finance, but I've done a lot of different things in finance. And I know people that have moved from finance to marketing to accounting to sales, and they've moved all around the career spectrum because they have a skill set that might transfer from one or the other, or maybe they want to grow into something else that they've just tapped into. I've recently started taking some online data science classes just because I'm interested in it, and I work in finance and I build spreadsheets every day. I could argue I'm already on my way to being a data scientist, but I don't know certain programming codes and I don't know all the buzzwords, but I do know that that is something I'm very interested in, analyzing numbers and presenting them in a thoughtful manner. That's something that my heart is in, and I like that part of my job. And so if I can expand on that and excel that, I'm not saying it's going to take me to do a different career, but it's going to give me a different skill set in my current career that I think might be a value add when I'm trying to land customers or do different sorts of deals in business. And so it's always kind of thinking about ways to improve yourself, but happiness should be the underlying theme, not money, not someone else's success. What is your heart really in?
Thank you so much, Elliott, for all of this insight and information into financial literacy and the things that we should consider, like happiness and whether we're truly interested in what we're studying. This has been a really great webinar. And on behalf of Career Scoops and all of our attendees and anyone who watches this as it is being recorded, I just want to thank you so much for your time and the value that you've been able to share with us.
My pleasure. And again, my email, elliottmeena@ansleycapital.com. I would love to continue the conversation with anybody who has any more questions.
Wonderful. And if you watching are interested in learning more about Career Scoops or would like to have a conversation with us, you can reach us at info@career-scoops.com or find us on Facebook, Instagram, and TikTok. Is there anyone else who'd like to say something before we wrap up?
I just wanted to join Deja in thanking Elliott, and thanks all of the attendees that came in today. I know it's inclement weather in Central Florida. It's tornado warning. It's storming outside, but because you're here, this content is important, and being financially literate is going to set you right for life. And I wish I knew these things when I was 19. So good luck with that. Thank you, everybody, for joining. Thanks, Elliott. Thanks, Deja, for hosting. And until next time.
Bye, everybody.
Bye, everyone.